wants to be with you.
Good morning again. I'm excited to jump into second week of this series where we're going to With University. We're going to learn what it means to be with God, that His desires to be with us. Like we just heard, I think often our mindset is that it's us chasing God. We're pursuing God, which there's a sense in which that is true and right, but sometimes it feels like we're never going to catch Him. He always seems so far away when we acknowledge His holiness and who He is as creator and sustainer of the universe. But Scripture tells the story also of God's pursuit of us, that God created us to be with Him, and He is pursuing that relationship with us. So what does that look like? What does it look like to say yes to that invitation? We talked about the declaration and invitation last week, that the declaration is, I am with you, and the invitation is, will you be with me? Will you be with me? So we're going to look at today, what does it look like to say yes to that invitation to be with God? You get invitations for all kinds of things in the course of your life, maybe get an invitation to go out to dinner with somebody or come to a party, a birthday party, a graduation party, and we have this process that we sort of go through when we're deciding if we're going to say yes to an invitation or not, and oftentimes it's about the who's inviting me, who's going to be there, and then sometimes it's about the what are we going to do, and maybe, if we're honest, there's a little bit of that, do I have something better to do? Is there something else I would just rather be doing than going to this thing? So, and we just do that sort of automatically and make these decisions based on who and what. So if you invited me to go with you to a ballet, if I say yes to that, you need to know it's because I like you. Okay, right? If you invite me to go out to a vegan restaurant with you, if I say yes, it's because I really like you, okay? But if you invite me to go to a baseball game or a bookstore or eat bacon, the 3 Bs, books, baseball, bacon, it may not have anything to do with you. I will say yes, most likely, to any of those invitations. And so how do we decide what we're going to say to this invitation from God? Will you be with me? Now, some of you may feel like, well, I already made that decision. That was a moment in time back when I was a kid, or maybe it was last year, or I've already said yes, and it was kind of a one and done thing to the invitation to be with God. But the way Jesus talks about following Him, it's more like a daily invitation. Will you be with me? Imagine that God is waking you up every morning with this question. Will you be with me? How do we decide if we're going to say yes to that invitation? Well, we need to know who He is, right? Who is this person that's inviting us into this relationship? And we also need to know what are the terms of being with God? What are the benefits and what are the costs? So today we're going to look at how this withness is a rhythm of blessing and sacrifice. But before we get into that, which we're going to get way into it. So if you have a Bible, you need to be ready to go. Genesis chapter 12, 15, 22. We're going to be all in that area. So get that queued up. But I want to back up and get a running start at this and review what we talked about last week. Last week we looked at creation, how God created everything that we see, plants and animals and earth and stars and galaxies and atoms and molecules and quarks, and He made all of it and sustains it. And then He made human beings, and He invited humans, a unique invitation to humans, to be with Him in this kind of running creation, like caring for and ruling over and helping creation to thrive. God invited human beings into this partnership. And so in the beginning, you have this witness. God and humans are together in this cooperative effort of caring for creation. And this relationship is characterized by blessing and obedience. God is blessing humans. He's providing everything that they need, and they're just blessed by His presence with them in the garden. But then there's also this element of obedience. God said, hey, this is really only going to work if you trust me to know what I'm doing, to know how to decide for you what's good and bad, to know what your purpose really is. This is only going to work if you trust me to be in charge. And so the humans are doing this. They're in the garden, they're doing their work, they're enjoying the presence of God, and they're obeying until you get to chapter 3. And then we have what we call the fall. The fall is just this phrase that we use for when Adam and Eve chose to reject God's authority over their life, his authority to say what's good and bad and right and wrong and what their purpose really is, and they took that authority for themselves, and now the relationship has a different tone. In fact, there's no witness anymore. In fact, they are without God. They're exiled from the garden, the place where they got to experience the presence of God. They can't actually go there anymore. So they are without God, and sin and death enter the world, and there's a curse that is now on humanity because of, and on all of creation really, because of this choice by the humans to say, we want to be in charge. We really would rather hold the reins, wear the crowns. We want to be the ones in charge. So what does life without God really look like? If you read the next few chapters of Genesis from 4 and 6 and 11, you see some stories that start to unfold that give us a picture of what life without God looks like for humanity. So in chapter 4, Adam and Eve, they have two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain murders his brother Abel. Like this happens really fast. You're like, how quickly can humanity deteriorate and devolve without God in charge? It's pretty quick. So you've got a brother murdering a brother. If that wasn't bad enough, by the time you get to chapter 6, and we're several generations down from Adam and Eve now, God looks at humanity and he uses a very troubling phrase. He says that the inclination of their hearts was only evil all the time. Things are pretty bad in our world right now. We can point to a lot of areas where there's evil and corruption and oppression and injustice. But could we really look at humanity and go, the inclination of the hearts of all humans is only evil all the time? It was really, really bad. So bad that God said, we've got to cleanse the world of this evil. And he preserved Noah and his family. And then you get to the Tower of Babel, where human beings, and this is just a few generations later, you think the flood, that should have done it, right? That should have done the trick. They should have gotten the message at that point, but they're still without God. And so the humans have gathered together and they've declared, we are going to make a great name for ourselves. And they begin to build this tower, and God looks on this and he realizes that human beings who are driven by selfishness and their own glory can be so destructive. He confuses the languages, scatters the people to limit the destructive nature of their own selfishness. Life without God turns really bad, really fast for humanity. But the good news is God is not content just to leave it at that and say, well, if you guys want to destroy yourselves, go ahead. I guess I can't stop you. God created us to be with him. And so he is going to be the initiator. He is going to take the steps to restore this relationship. So he begins to do that in the life of a man named Abram. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 12 and see how God takes this step to begin to restore witness through Abram. And he's going to call Abram and his family to be a representation of what life with God looks like to all people all over the planet for all time. And we're going to see this rhythm of blessing and sacrifice in the life of Abraham. So watch for that as we begin to read in Genesis chapter 12. You ready? No? Let's do it anyway. All right. You're here. If you left now, it'd be awkward. So here we go. Genesis 12, 1 through 3. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you, and I will make your name great. You see how that's the opposite of what the people were doing at the Tower of Babel? They were saying, we are going to make a great name for ourselves. And now God is saying, no, I will make your name great. I'm not opposed to you having a great name, but it's got to be for my purposes. Why? Why will he make Abram's name great? So that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So we see the blessing. God is going to bless Abraham. And in fact, through Abraham and his descendants, God is going to bless the entire planet. How's he going to do that? It's a little foreshadowing there. All points to Jesus. I'll let you figure that out. But where's the sacrifice? So the sacrifice comes in the very first verse here, where God tells Abram he's got to move away from everything and everyone that he knows. Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever had to pack up all your stuff and move away from everything and everyone that you know. And go to a far land. It's hard. It's painful. It hurts. It costs something. So Abram is called to this sacrifice, and he's invited into this limited witness. There's going to be witness, but it's going to be limited because there's still sin. As long as there's sin, we can't fully be with God, but God is going to make a way for some kind of limited witness. Let's move on to Genesis chapter 15. So part of this promise that God makes is that Abram's going to have descendants, and God is going to bless the world through them. At this point, he's 75 years old, his wife is 65, and they have no kids. So there are some questions surfacing pretty quickly. How is this going to happen? And Abram is going to bring those up in chapter 15. Verse 1, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, this man shall not be your heir, your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to them, so shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So Abram comes to God and he says, all right, we still have a problem. And it's been a few years since you made this promise, and I still don't have any kids, so what's happening here? And God says, I am going to be faithful. I'm going to keep my promise. In fact, look at the sky. If you could count all those stars, that's how many kids you're going to have, your descendants you're going to have. And we know God fulfilled his promise because Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham, right? It's true. Straight out of the Bible. So one day we should do if you don't know what I'm talking about, just count yourself fortunate. All right. So God reaffirms this promise, and this blessing is going to happen. It's coming. And this blessing is going to begin to change Abram. He's going to really become a different and a distinct person. And this is really why God has set him apart. It wasn't because there was something really special about him. It was God had chosen him to reflect what it was going to look like to be in a relationship with God to everyone around him. And that's exactly what we see happen. Abram, he's kind of a nomad, so he wanders around all over this land, and he'll run into people from time to time who recognize something unique in him. You see this in Genesis 21. He runs into this guy named Abimelech. Abimelech's sort of just this kind of ruler of this local tribe. And when Abimelech meets Abraham, he goes, oh, I know who you are. You're one of Yahweh's guys. Your God is with you, right? Why is it unique for Abimelech to say, your God is with you? Because, there were a lot of deities that were being worshiped, false gods that were being worshiped all over the place, and people had religion. There was a lot of religion everywhere. But there was something unique about Abram's relationship and his God. There was a witness that Abimelech could see. And he's like, you're not just making sacrifices to an idol. Your God is with you. There's something unique about that. And how did he know that? It was something about the way Abram lived his life. He also was very wealthy, and things were going pretty well. And Abimelech's like, man, your God is with you, and I can see it. It's obvious that your God is with you. And shouldn't that be true? Shouldn't God's presence in our lives change us, make us distinct in some way, that people can see us and recognize God with us? I don't know how you describe that, almost like salt and light or something. Maybe we'll work on that later. But that's what God is doing. He is changing Abram by his presence and by this blessing. But it's a rhythm, remember, of blessing and sacrifice. So the sacrifice part, it's going to kick up a notch here. We're going to be introduced to the concept of altars. Altars. The word altar, the root for that is related to the word for slaughter. It means slaughter. So an altar is a slaughter place. I know that's not very appealing, but it's what don't know what you want me to do. It's here. It's a slaughter place. And the first altar that we come across is in Genesis 9 when Noah and his family get off the ark finally, and they're kissing the ground. And so they build an altar and make a sacrifice to God. What they do is they kill some animals and they offer them on this altar, this slaughter place. And you start to get this picture that the altar is a place where something is happening between God and his people. That there's this presence of God there that's possible in a way at the altar that's not possible any other way. Why would that be? Because remember, we're still in a limited witness. We're in a limited witness because of sin. And what the altar does, in some way, the death of the animal that is offered on this slaughter place deals with sin in this moment at this place so that the human being can be with God. The altar, the sacrifice, sort of makes that possible in that moment. It deals with sin in that moment so the people can be with God. So you see altars start to pop up all over the place where people have these encounters with God and they build an altar and they make a sacrifice. It happens all over the Old Testament. And it's sort of serving a lot of different functions. And one of those is a way for the human beings to kind of go, all right, God, everything I have is yours. And this is a way for me to show. Here's the best of what I have as a reminder to me that everything I have is yours, which is kind of a reversal of what happens in the garden in Genesis 3, right? What's the sin? Adam and Eve take something that they're not supposed to take. And at the altar, the human beings are now giving something to acknowledge that God actually is the owner of everything. So there's a little bit of a reversal of Eden already happening here. And the presence of God shows up in a unique way. And human beings, through this rhythm of blessing and sacrifice, are enjoying this limited witness in their relationship to God under what we would call a covenant. A covenant. When, in Genesis 12 and 15, when God makes this promise, it's what we call a covenant, which is a mutual promise. It's a two-sided, two people saying, hey, if you do this, I'll do that. And I'll do this if you do that. And that's the covenant promise that Abram is living under, and really his whole family. But the call is still that God gets to be the one in charge. The invitation, will you be with me, is still, you have to trust me with every part of your life. And so Abram is going to be tested in this in Genesis 22. We'll come to that in just a moment. But I want you to see what James has to say. In the New Testament, thousands of years after Abram was dead, the brother of Jesus, who's a leader in the church, is writing this letter, and he brings up Abraham. Here's what he says in James 2:21. Was not Abraham, our father, justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. Abraham gets to be a friend of God. That's a lot of witness. That's a lot of togetherness. How do you get to that point? Well, there has to be some sacrifice involved to deal with sin. There has to be Abraham at some point saying, you're in charge of every aspect of my life. How did that happen? Well, you heard the part in here about Isaac and an altar. Isaac is the son that was promised. And when God said, you're going to have a lot of descendants, and Abraham's like, I don't have any descendants. We're a long way from a lot of descendants. And finally, after 25 years of waiting, Abraham's wife has a son, and they name him Isaac. And when Isaac is a boy, in Genesis 22, the Lord tests Abraham, and he says, I want you to take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him to me as a sacrifice on a mountain that I'll show you. So Abraham and his son pack up the wood for the sacrifice, for the altar, and are hiking up the mountain. And the son, Isaac, he knows what a sacrifice is. He knows that it's a slaughter place. The altar is a slaughter place, that something has to die. So he's looking around going, I don't see any sheep or goats, so where is the sacrifice? Abraham's response is, the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide. So they get to the top of the mountain. Isaac is bound up and laid on the wood, and Abraham raises a knife over his son. In a moment that can only be described as someone who is fully surrendered, who has said, God, you're in charge of every aspect of my life. If there was anything that Abraham was going to hold back from God, it would have been his son. If there was anything, any area of his life where he was going to say to God, no, you cannot be in charge of this. You can have everything else. You can have 99.9% of my decisions and my authority, but when it comes to my son, he's mine. But in this moment, Abraham is saying, 100% God, 100% it's all yours. And in that moment, the angel intervenes and says, don't kill your son. And Abraham looks over, and there in the thicket is a ram caught by its horns. And they call this mountain the place where the Lord provides, because God provided a sacrifice. So they could complete the sacrifice on the altar, the slaughter place, and keep his son. And so we have to ask this question. Can we be with God if Jesus is not Lord of every aspect of our lives? This seems to be the question that Abraham was being tested by. God has invited him. I will be with you. I will be your God. I will bless you. I'll make your name great. I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth through you. Will you be with me? And the cost of saying yes to that is God has to be the authority, the one in charge of every aspect of Abraham's life. And in this case, he made the right choice. He was not a perfect man. He sinned. He had moments when he held things back. He lied about his relationship with his wife so that to preserve his own life, he slept with his wife's servant to try to speed up the promise of God. He was not a perfect man. But in this moment, he lays down everything. Because in order to be with God, he has to be Lord over every part of Abraham's life. So where does that leave us? I think if we're wrestling with this, can I be with God if Jesus is not Lord over every part of my life? The answer seems to be no, but it is so difficult to actually lay everything down. What if I can't do it? What if I can't? What if I'm unable to lay everything down every single day? If the invitation is daily and to say yes to this invitation is a daily laying down of everything, what if I miss a day? What if I fail? What if I fall? Here's where I want to go back to Genesis 15 and see how I believe that God made a way. So remember, Genesis 15, Abraham comes to God and says, I don't have any kids. Are you gonna do this for me or not? And God says, yes, I'm going to do it. Abraham believes him, but God has also promised him a land, and Abraham's not sure how he's ever going to know if he owns the land, right? They didn't have real estate agents and banks and survey stakes. How does he know that this land is going to be his? And he kind of says, God, can I get this in writing somehow? Can we make this a binding agreement that I'm going to get this land? So here's how that goes down. In Genesis 15:7, he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess. But he said, O Lord, how am I to know that I shall possess it? He said to him, bring me a heifer 3 years old, a female goat 3 years old, and a ram 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he brought him all these, cut them in half, and laid each half over and against the other, but he did not cut the bird in half. Okay, this is weird. Abraham has asked for give me some proof, give me some evidence, can I get this in writing? And God says, yeah, go get some animals, and we're going to cut up. You would think maybe he would be like, go get a tablet and, a pen, and we'll make this official. No, it's go get some animals, cut them up, and set the two halves of the animals opposite each other. What's going to happen is the blood from those animals is going to drain towards the middle, and there's going to be this kind of river of blood between these animals. What is going on here? Well, there was an ancient Near Eastern cultural practice of making covenant. In fact, the word that we just call covenant, the way that they would say that, they would say cut covenant. Instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to make a promise to you, they would say, hey, let's cut covenant. And what they're talking about was this concept of killing animals, and somehow this blood of the animals becomes part of the agreement. And what does this really look like for Abraham and Moses? In ancient Near Eastern cultures, you can read about that some, but it's also found in the book of Jeremiah. God makes a reference to this sort of cutting covenant in Jeremiah 34. Through the prophet Jeremiah, he says this, "And the men who transgressed my covenant and did not keep the terms of the covenant they made before me, I will make them like the calf that they cut in two and passed between its parts." So God is saying, hey, it's kind of like we cut covenant and you guys pass between the parts. Now, what does that mean? They would walk through this river of blood in a sense to say, if I don't keep my end of the covenant, it's my life on the line. You can kill me like we killed these animals. It's my life. It's my blood that I'm putting on the line to say I'm going to keep my end of this deal. So Abraham says, "Can I get this in writing?" God says, "Let's cut covenant." And so they cut the animals up. And now, if Abram is going to keep his end of the deal, which God has said, "I will be your God, you will be my people," like you be with me. You got to lay down everything to me. Then he's supposed to pass through the pieces. And if God's going to keep his end of the covenant, God will pass through the pieces. So what happens when they get all this set up? Abraham falls asleep. And you're like, well, this is bad timing, buddy. You should have had a second cup of coffee. Like, we got things to do. But he falls asleep, and he does not pass through the pieces. So what happens on God's end? Verse 17 says this, "When the sun had gone down and it was dark, behold, a smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces." A smoking firepot and a flaming torch passed between the pieces. You remember in Exodus when God delivers the people from slavery and they're wandering in the desert, and it says that God leads them through the desert. How does God show up to lead them through the desert? Well, during the day, it's a column of smoke, and at night, it's a pillar of fire. When God shows up on Mount Sinai, what does it look like? It's smoke and fire. When his presence finally inhabits the tabernacle that they built in the holy place, what does it look like? Smoke and fire. And so this smoking firepot and this flaming torch pass between the pieces. And there's a sense in which maybe what's happening here, guys, maybe what's happening is God is passing through the pieces saying, if I don't keep my end of the covenant, if I don't give you this land and give you all these descendants just like I promised, it's my life. You can kill me. Good luck with that, but I'm going to keep my end. I mean, God's not going to break his end of the deal. But there are two representations of God that pass through. So maybe what's happening is God is passing through a second time, saying, Abraham, if you don't keep your end of the covenant, if you don't fully surrender every aspect of your life to me every single day, it's my life. It's my life on the line. It's my blood you can take. And then what do we see when Jesus comes and the cross becomes an altar, a slaughter place, where the blood of the Lamb is shed because the humans couldn't keep our end of the deal. We could not perfectly obey. So God says, it's my life. It's my life for yours. He sacrifices himself so that we can stay in relationship with him. That's how much God wants to be with you. He put his own life on the line for our mistakes, for our sins, for our choice to rebel, for our selfishness and our greed and our envy. He said, it's my life for yours. God made a way for us to say yes to the invitation in spite of the fact that we can't keep our end of the deal perfectly. He has declared, I am with you. And he has offered, will you be with me? Not just a decision that you're going to make one time in your past, but every morning he wakes you up with this question, will you be with me? It's a rhythm of blessing and sacrifice. God's presence changes us. When he is with us, we become someone who's distinct, that people can look at us and know, man, God is with you in a way it's not like the way that other people have kind of this religion or spirituality. No, your God is actually with you. That's what it's supposed to look like. I encourage you to ask that question. Like, as a follower of Jesus, what are some ways where the presence of God has made me distinct, has turned me into salt and light? The other question we have to ask, and we have to circle back to this, is can I be with God if Jesus is not Lord of every part of my life? It's a tough one that I think we have to wrestle with, and I think an important way to do that is to look at the stories of people who have made the sacrifices, who have laid everything down. There's a man named David who went to Anderson University to study chemistry about 60 years ago, and was very, very bright, top of his class, graduated, got a great job at a big chemical company, was assigned a project that had been a frustration to a lot of the veteran chemists there, but through some experiments, he made a discovery, and that led to the invention of a new kind of plastic. And as a brand new rookie chemist, research chemist, he's on a fast track to success. But he could never shake this sense that God had called him into ministry, and that maybe his pursuit of chemistry was a way of running from a call from God. So he wrestled with this and eventually came to a place where he said, I have to obey, I have to say yes, I have to submit. So he quit his job, left his promising career as a star research chemist, and went back to Anderson University to get a degree in ministry. And then for the next 50 years, he has served the Lord faithfully alongside of his wife as they have taught and preached and developed leaders for the kingdom of God in the United States and all over the world. And my guess is, if you ask David, I mean, what does this look like? This life of giving yourself to God, he'd probably say something along the lines of, it's a rhythm of blessing and sacrifice. I don't know, you could ask him. He's sitting right there. His name is David New. Raise your hand, David. There are stories like that probably all over this building, all over this community, not just like David's, but moments where people have decided, if I'm going to be with God, he's got to be Lord over everything. What does that look like for you? As you wake up on Monday morning, God wakes you up with this declaration, I am with you, and this invitation, will you be with me? What does it look like for you to say yes to that? Is he really Lord over every part of your life? What would change? Is there anything that you're holding back? The way that we think, man, if there was anything Abraham was going to hold back, it should have been Isaac. But he didn't. Is there anything you're holding back where you've kind of said, God, you 99.9% of my decisions and my authority, and is that keeping you from being with